UFP, the United Federation of Podcasts.
Welcome to Franchise Fatigue, the little podcast on the United Federation of Podcast Network, where your hosts cover movies, remakes, and sequels. I'm your host, Brandon-Shea Mutella, and joining me all the way from the past on his flying train is Zach Doc Moore. How are you doing?
Hey, Brandon, just here raising my sons HG and Wells.
HG, that's like homegrown?
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. I love it. How's your wife that you saved from the cliffs of peril?
She's fine.
Good, excellent. Well, we are
and so
here.
is our dog.
So is your dog that you had to come back and get. That's great.
Had to come back for Einstein.
So let's talk about the Back to the Future trilogy. Now that we are all done, we do our little recap episode, and the first question that we ask on these little recaps is, Zach, which is your favorite, and how would you rank them?
I mean, obviously the first one is my favorite. Now, I guess if you asked me when I was a kid, it would have said Back to the Future 2, right? Mm-hmm. But, tastes change and, over time. And you can recognize the brilliance for brilliance better when you're an adult. Mm-hmm. And, definitely Back to the Future is my favorite of the three. And Back to the Future 3 is my second favorite. And Back to the Future 2 is my third favorite. And they're all great, right? And as we have started to do now in these recaps, we say what we gave them as far as ratings. And so I gave Back to the Future 1 and 3 5 out of 5, and I gave Back to the Future 2 4 out of 5. So that's how I rank and rate the films.
My ranking and ratings are identical to yours. So while except for the only fact that 3 was my favorite when I was a kid, then 5 for Back to the Future 1, 5 for Back to the Future 3, and 4 for Back to the Future 2, and that is the order that I would rank them. As fun as I think the third one is, just that script writing and the brilliance of that first script just keeps Back to the Future in first place for me.
I think this is the first time this has ever happened, Brandon.
Yeah.
As far as us having the same, not only the same ranking, we might have had the same rankings before, I'm not sure, but having the same rankings and the same ratings. Right. So that just shows you Back to the Future brings people together.
I was just going to say that, unfortunately, my ranking style and rating style has finally rubbed off on you.
Well, that's not going to last forever. But at least as far as this trilogy goes, that's great. So,
yeah, because I'll probably give Children of the Corn 4 or 5 stars when we get to it.
Yeah, we're not getting there for a while, and I doubt that I'll be giving that film 5 stars, but you never know. The future's not set. It is what you make it. Yes. So make yours a good one.
Excellent. That's a lot of. You just crossed the streams significantly there with Terminator 2 and Back to the Future 3.
There's no fate for what you make, so make it a good one.
That's what I heard in my head.
Time travel's great, though. Like, I think all of my favorite franchises have time travel in them. Star Trek, Terminator, Back to the Future.
Yes. Hey, what if I told you there was time travel in Children of the Corn series?
Well, then, sign me up. Sign me up.
Okay, there's not, but,
Oh,
anyways.
that's too bad.
Awesome. Well, normally we do a favorite, but it's like, what do we do our favorites on this one? Like, because, when we do Mission Impossible, we're like, what's your favorite stunt? And I think in Godfather we did, like, what's your favorite hit? Or something like that, right? Like, what do we do for this one? I don't know what to do.
Well, I mean, I was thinking about that, too, because I guess a question we could ask, what's your favorite time period to take place in? Mm-hmm. And we kind of did that for 2, right? Because 2 had different time periods, but if all, like, say, you have 1985, you have 1955, you have 2015, and you have 1885. Do you have a favorite time period of all these, Brandon? I guess mine would be 1955. So. Okay,
yeah. So I would go 1885 for me because I just...
Okay.
I think Back to the Future 3 is my favorite Western. I didn't say that in the last episode, but I'm not big on Westerns, right? And I think I said that when we covered the Man with No Name series, or the Dollars trilogy, or whatever you want to call it. But I don't watch a lot of Westerns, but I've always loved, I've never not enjoyed Back to the Future 3. So I'd say it's have to be my favorite Western, period.
Yeah, I would still say the 50s. I'm like a retro guy, right? I'm like, I like 50s, like, Twilight Zone, people in suits, a classier time in some areas, right? I think, as evidenced by this very franchise, we made a lot of advancements, even 30 years to 1985, much less 60 years to the 21st century where we are today. But I like that time period, the 40s, 50s, that whole time period. And just the whole charm and shine of it all. And just it's fun revisiting that in that way. I think it's interesting that both of our favorites are like the past, right? Because I think part of the fun is seeing contemporary, or as of the making of the films, contemporary characters going back into the past. I mean, kind of fish out of water in some levels, like using vernacular of their time back then and seeing people misunderstand, and so I think that's part of the fun of time travel. And I think those are both really evident in those time periods, obviously. So that's part of the fun there. And I think there's the most heart in those time periods too. You have the love stories in both and that kind of thing. So yeah, I mean, if given a choice, I guess of all the time travel to any one of the time periods here you could go to, I'd be like, well, I go to the 50s, I guess. And it sounds like you'd go to the 1885.
1885s, yeah.
But we didn't really talk about this last time either. But it is, to your point about the Western, it's interesting to watch these now, or watch this Back to the Future 3 now, having watched all the Dollars trilogy, right?
Yeah. Because when we get that reference that we now finally understand,
right? I
mean, we got it before because they showed the clip in the alternate 85, right? Biff 85, right. Trump 85. So, hypothetical question for you.
Yeah.
If they were to make a Back to the Future 4, what would you want them to do?
See, that's tough. We've kind of talked about this throughout the trilogy here, as we've talked about the future of the franchise and what a hard line they have on any future movies. In a perfect world, ideally, I guess, if there was ever going to be a 4, and I've said this before, but they would have made it in 2015 to come out in 2015 to tie in with the whole, it's the 2015 of the real world and the one from the future, from 1985 and all that. That would have been cool. Obviously, they didn't do that. I guess ideally, if they were going to do a 4th one, that's what mine would be. But now, I don't know. Like, would you even want to see a remake of this? Like, would you want to see a sequel or a remake? Like, that's where I am on it. I can't decide. Like, I feel like if they made a remake, I would feel like, okay, well, that's its own thing. I can separate it from the original, the holy trilogy, if you will, right? And I think I would be able to accept that more. And if they tried to like cobble together a 4, and that would retroactively change some things in the trilogy, and like, well, I thought everybody lived happily ever after. You telling me Marty and Jennifer blah blah blah, or what about Doc and the train? Right, all these things that have lived happily ever after imagination would be changed, and so as irreplaceable as Doc and Marty are as Christopher Lloyd and Michael J. Fox, I think it would be a cleaner, more acceptable thing to do if they just made a remake, right? So I don't want them to do anything else, but if they had to do something else, I think doing a remake would be the best way to go. And I've always said this, if they're ever going to remake Back to the Future, Elijah Wood is too old for it now. I would have always said him because he cameoed in Back to the Future 2 as a little kid, so I think that'd be a cool connection. He was, he's kind of like Michael J. Fox, kind of guy, right? I guess he's too old now, so you have to pick somebody else. Even guys like Zac Efron are too old, so I really don't know what kind of teenage actor you could pick, right? But I have the perfect Doc Brown, Michael Richards from Seinfeld, Kramer.
Sure, that would work.
So I've always thought like he'd be so great. Like even the way he like opens doors and stuff, it just reminds me of like a zany character. So he'd be my pick for a rebooted Doc Brown. Of course, so much. I don't know how old he is. He might, remember Christopher Lloyd was like in his late 40s when he made this, and that's how they could go to different time periods. Michael Richards might already be like 70. I don't know. Maybe he's too old. So I guess that's my my hang-up. But you see what I mean about like a remake. Being Star Trek fans, I think you understand, right?
Which is what they should have done with the Kelvin timeline, as I've said a couple of times.
So that is my very long-winded, complicated answer to this. I love how, again, this is one of those extremely rare franchises that stands alone, right? There's not random spin-offs and remakes and ill-advised sequels, but if they had to do it, you could obviously have so much fun with like social media and the internet existing today, and then going back to, because we're such a nostalgia obsessed culture now, right? I mean, it just makes perfect sense to do something like Back to the Future again. So I go with a remake, but I'm not like gonna like call for one,
Right.
But
I know what
that
you're
is,
saying. I know.
Yeah, that's what I would.
So
that's
our
my
hypothetical
preference.
question that we do on these recaps. So what if it was a scene-for-scene remake by Gus Van Sant?
Only if they insert a scene where Marty is masturbating.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, just
And if
sounds
you don't know what I'm
perfect.
talking about, just go look it up on the internet. The
Almost
Psycho
scene-for-scene
remake.
remake. Excellent. Well, let's
What about you?
Yeah, for me, I think I'd say I'd want a Back to the Future 4. I would like them to go to 2019 and stop the coronavirus. I think that'd be a very good story.
Way too topical, Brandon.
I would have to say that I think the one thing that they didn't do, and I know that this is such a cliche of movies and sequels, is like Back to the Future in space, right? Like that would be like the next thing that they would have to do, right? So while we talked last time about aliens and whatnot, I don't necessarily think it would have to be aliens, but I don't know, maybe Doc Brown's, that they could tie in some crazy Jules Verne reference or whatever. I don't know, like maybe they go and they meet Jules Verne and take him to space, and that's how he comes up with the ideas for the books. I don't know, something like that. So,
Okay, I see.
they could tie it in that way. So it doesn't have to be like the future. It could be like something to do with the past, maybe. I don't know. Just a thought. But, again, I'm not calling for it because, yes, I do agree it is a perfect trilogy as it is, with the end and everything like that.
What if they made it Back to the Future 4 and Christopher Glover came back for it as George McFly?
Hey, they could. They could totally do it. Old George McFly.
Old George McFly.
While he was floating around upside down, he found the DeLorean and decided to go back in time and, do something. I don't know what. So.
Yeah, I mean, I still recommend everybody out there to check out the comic books. Unfortunately, you can't check out the rides anymore at the Universal Studios parks, but go look them up on YouTube. There's lots of cool. I'm really into that theme park ride history kind of subculture of YouTube. So I watch a lot of those channels like Defunct Land or Yes to World Entertainment, and they kind of show you the history and what the ride was all about, and like tell you about the ride and all that. So that's what you have to do to experience those things these days because they don't exist. They've been erased from existence. That's what I recommend. So yeah, Back to the Future Part 4. What would they call it? Part 4? Or would they call it like Back to the Future: The Return or some Back to the Future Resurrection or Requiem? You know what I mean?
I think they should just call it the death of Doc Brown.
Death of Emmett L. Brown. Well, that disconnects it from the original trilogy. Now, that's what I'm looking for. Some disconnect, some way in my head can be like, well, it doesn't really connect to the originals. That's not part of the Skywalker saga proper. So that's what you're looking for there. So I don't know, man. In this franchise,
Jules and Verne Skywalker. That's how it ends. I love it.
I guess if you could play with that. We talked about Jules Verne, like why Jules Verne and not H.G. Wells, right? Like you're saying, like he goes on adventures and Jules Verne writes about them. Maybe something like that happens, and then H.G. Wells gets inspired to write The Time Machine and that kind of thing. Although that starts to sound a little more like Bill and Ted at that point, going around and capturing historical people and going through time with them. So I don't know, man. I've always said this. I've always said, you know what? I'm glad they didn't remake Back to the Future. I'm glad they made something like Hot Tub Time Machine instead, right? Mm-hmm. Which is obviously a much more comedic, kind of raunchy version of this. But it's like, hey, what if you went back in time with a ridiculous item, right? Like a hot tub. So that's what I'm looking for more than like, let's remake Back to the Future. Like that's the problem, and we'll talk about this as we go through more franchises, I guess. But
yeah,
like the '80s was such just a fountain of original ideas. Mm-hmm. I mean, look at like E.T., RoboCop, Predator, Terminator, right? Like just you turn around every year, there's multiple just amazing new original Ghostbusters, right? Mm-hmm. Like original ideas for franchises and movies that were so clever. And what are we doing today? We're remaking them or making years later sequels, and it's like, and we love sequels, right? But there needs to be a world where there are sequels and there are original ideas, because eventually you're like the snake eating itself. You're going to run out of stuff to do.
We need sequels to those original ideas.
No, that's not the answer. Blade Runner 2049, right? But that was great. So what do I know?
We need original ideas that can have sequels to them. That's what I want.
Well, I mean, those are movies that we'll never talk about because, I mean, there's only 2 of them, as we established, right? But Blade Runner, Tron, again, great original movies in the 80s, right?
Yep.
What if they never made any sequel? This is our own, because there's not many questions here since we've covered so much material and we're in so much agreement. But Like, what if they never made a sequel to the original Back to the Future?
That'd be
Right?
sad.